Welcome to the Tron Church Safeguarding Training. Please switch your phone to silent, even if you're in your own house, but don't switch it off. You'll need it later to save some numbers. Like the safety briefings on an aeroplane, we would ask you to pay careful attention, even if you've heard this sort of thing many times before. You should already have received a PDF copy of our safeguarding guidelines. And after this session, you must email agnes.bruff@tron.church to confirm that you have received and read the guidelines and that you have gone through this video training session. The Tron leadership team are committed to ensuring a safe environment throughout the Tron Church. That commitment to safeguarding is put into practice in various ways. Our safeguarding policy makes our commitment clear and public, and one of our elders, Alan Clark, is the designated safeguarding lead on behalf of the leadership team. He is responsible for overseeing our safeguarding policy and checking that we are doing what we should. The safeguarding guidelines provide a code of conduct for staff and volunteers to follow. We have robust recruitment procedures and we provide regular training, including today. It's helpful for you to know this so that you can reassure parents and others that we know what we're doing. But it's not just the leadership's job. Safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. This session will help you to understand your responsibilities as members of a ministry team. We have a safeguarding coordinator and a deputy safeguarding coordinator. Our safeguarding coordinator is John Kerr. His role is to promote good safeguarding practice throughout our church family and to respond to concerns or disclosures of harm. He is supported by Agnes Bruff, that's me, the deputy safeguarding coordinator. Take out your phone now and save their numbers in case you need to contact them about a concern. Our numbers are also on the back of the safeguarding guidelines. We'll say more about dealing with concerns or disclosures shortly. But first, why bother with safeguarding? Guarding the safety and well-being of children and vulnerable adults is something we would want to do even if there were no legal obligations on us to do it. The Bible says we should care especially for the most vulnerable. God commands his people to care for the vulnerable and to love and care for one another. We do also have legal obligations since we have children in our care and we want to meet those. And for the sake of our reputation, the reputation of the church and of the gospel, we want to be above reproach in all that we do so that the gospel is not maligned. It's definitely worth bothering about. I said earlier that our safeguarding guidelines provide a code of conduct for staff and volunteers to follow. You should have been given a copy of the guidelines by email, and you need to email agnes.bruff@tron.church afterwards to say that you've received them, that you agree to read them and to abide by them. You should do what they say, but it's helpful for you to understand the principles that underlie good safeguarding practice because the guidelines can't cover every eventuality. There are 3 underlying principles. The first is to decrease isolation. That is to limit or decrease the extent to which a worker is alone with a young person. For example, never meet a young person one-to-one alone in your house. Go to a coffee shop or a room in church instead. And if you are meeting in church, use a room in a busy area for one-to-ones or even for groups, rather than in the basement, if possible. There must be at least 2 leaders present when any group meets. And if you need to speak to a child alone during group time, think about how to do so visibly but without being overheard. Secondly, we want to be increasing accountability. That is, making sure that other people know what you're doing and could challenge you on it, and helping one another on our safeguarding practice. For example, if you want to have a WhatsApp group with some young people, have 2 leaders in the group. For one-to-ones, we require permission, and there's a permission form you can use. Or asking or telling someone if you do something or are about to do something that isn't specifically covered by the guidelines, or that you're not sure about for some reason. And giving and being willing to receive feedback from others on our teams. Thirdly, balancing power. That is, aiming to minimise the inevitable imbalance of power that there is between workers, adult workers, and children. For example, don't physically tower over a child whilst encouraging them to turn to Christ. And also taking particular care not to exploit a child's natural desire to please an adult that they like. Now let's look at 4 key sections of the guidelines, starting with hugging and touching. It's an oft-quoted myth that any physical contact between an adult and a child or young person is unacceptable and must be avoided. It's inappropriate and unwanted physical contact which must be avoided. That's our safeguarding guidelines, section 5. Can you think of situations where touch would be appropriate or inappropriate? And why not think about how the 3 principles might help? Think about who is involved, where it's happening, when, and how. Why don't you pause the video just now and have a think? So you might be thinking a hug in a crowd is different from a hug alone in a room. It might be a good idea to tell someone if a child was very touchy-feely rather than just keeping it to yourself. Be aware that a child might not want you to hug them, but might not feel that they can say no to you. You can have a little one on your knee in creche, and you can change a nappy, you can comfort, but don't make a child hug you. And of course, avoid anything that could be misconstrued or is sexualised at all. And you must not physically chastise any child. So have a look at this scenario and see what you think. It's the end of the weekend away, and the consensus opinion is that it's been amazing. There's lots of hugging and high fives amongst the young people while they're waiting to get into the minibus. And a TY girl, a teenage girl, comes over to give you a hug. What would you do? Again, pause the video for a few minutes and think about what you might do. You need to take more care in this situation if you're a male leader, because girls get crushes on nice young leaders. However, it's in a crowd, there's lots of people around, it's very visible. So it's okay to let the girl give you a hug. Keep it short, maybe a side hug if you can manage it, or jokingly put out your hand to shake hands if you'd rather. But don't shout, "Get your hands off me." That would just be excessive and unhelpful. Now let's think about working alone with children or young people. The guidelines say, although it is sometimes necessary and helpful for you to speak to a child alone, you should not be regularly left alone in charge of a group. There must be at least 2 adults with any group, and enough adults to keep them safe and to evacuate them from the building in an emergency. Recommended adult to child ratios are in the guidelines. In addition, one-to-ones are possible, but you need to ask for a form from Agnes and get permission from the parents first. There's more help on this in section 7 of the guidelines. So have a think about these two scenarios. You find you're the only leader with a bunch of lads in Lomond at 5:15 on a Friday at the beginning of Activate in Tron Youth. Or you find you're the only Sunday school teacher in Mull with 4 4-year-olds. Again, pause the video and think what you would do. Well, Lomond is on the ground floor at Bath Street, and it's quite a visible room. And on Friday, there's quite a lot of people in the building for Activate in Tron Youth. So it's quite visible. Lots of people are in the building. Lots of people could easily be passing by. So make sure the doors are propped open. See if you can call on another leader. These kids are old enough that you could go and find another leader without them coming to any harm while you're away. And if you ended up in that room with just one young person, you'd probably be wise just to move to another activity with them. But the 4-year-olds in Mull, Mull is in the basement and quite tucked away. And anyway, you don't want to be with a group of 4-year-olds for a whole session, so you must fix this unless you're really sure that another teacher is on their way. The best plan would be just to join your group up with someone else's group. You might be able to rope someone else in, another adult in, but it's probably easiest just to join groups. Or how about this scenario? You go to pick up 3 of the young people for church by arrangement, but when you arrive, only 1 of the girls is coming. What would you do? Well, our guidelines allow 1 leader to be alone in a car with young people, but you should take care when doing so, obviously. Whether it should happen at all or be a regular thing or not depends on a number of factors. What sort of relationship the leader has with the child's parents, whether or not the child is particularly vulnerable, who else knows about the lift. You need to think wisely and carefully about all of that. And so in this situation, a male leader might decide to leave the girl at home if she can get safely home again. But if the parents have gone out, he might instead phone the parents and or phone Agnes or Phil Copeland or a team leader to say that he's going to take her by herself and then get her to sit in the back of the car. If you're taking 3 or 4 kids home and they all turn up, but you're dropping them off one by one, think about the best order in which to drop them off. Dropping last the child whose parents you know best and who would be happy for you to do that. And finally, security and evacuation. It is everyone's duty to make sure that health, safety and security remain a priority. That's in the guidelines. We must all be alert to potential hazards in the rooms we are using. This is your responsibility, even if someone else has left the room in a mess before you. So say you were a creche helper, you need to have a good look around the room every week to check that there's nothing that a child could choke on or be harmed by. You must make sure you know how to evacuate the building in the event of an emergency, know where the fire exits are and the emergency evacuation procedures. And only leaders, parents and children should be in any of the children's rooms while there are children present. We operate in large, complicated buildings, especially at Central and Kelvin Grove, and there is a danger of a child being abducted or of wandering off. So it's vital that only those who have good reason to be in our children's rooms are there. Never arrange to meet family or friends in a creche or Sunday school room after a service. Don't let members of the church family wander into creche for a chat or to hand over a present for a new mum. And be alert to adults being in areas of the building that they don't need to be. And finally, dealing with concerns. If you are concerned about the welfare of any of the children or young people that we have contact with, for whatever reason, your responsibility is to pass it on to one of the safeguarding coordinators. Please never do nothing. Even if you're unsure, never do nothing. Some signs of abuse are listed in the guidelines, and sections 14 and 15 tell you how to respond. It's not your responsibility to decide if a concern is significant enough. Ask your team leader's advice by all means, but pass it on to the safeguarding coordinator or to the deputy. Don't worry that you're going to make a mountain out of a molehill or cause trouble. The safeguarding coordinators and one of the ministers will decide what action, if any, to take. So the onus isn't on you. Don't hold back because you think you would otherwise be making trouble. Please pass on any concerns you have. It may not be necessary to take any action on the back of what you pass on, or the coordinators and the minister may decide to provide support for a family, or they may already know the circumstances of the child and be able to help. They may decide to involve other agencies in some circumstances. Have a think about this situation. Usually the girls in the youth group get on well, but lately you've noticed that one of them seems to be spending a lot of time on her own and seems reluctant to join in. She can be difficult and comes by herself. Despite the hot weather, she won't take off her cardigan. What would you do? What are you thinking? Pause the video and spend some time thinking about that. Well, there might be no harm or abuse or anything to worry about here at all. It could just be regular teenage stuff. She could just be grumpy, miserable. She could be self-conscious about the hairiness of her arms or not like the t-shirt that she's wearing. However, get alongside her and be a good leader and keep an eye. If she's difficult, the temptation will be to give her a wide berth. So make an extra effort to give her time and attention. But there may be abuse here or self-harm, especially if this isn't just a one-off but a pattern of behaviour. She's withdrawn. She may be hiding injuries. So share your concerns with John or Agnes. Or how about this? You overhear a child from a church family you know well using sexual words you wouldn't expect him to know at his age. He's playing let's pretend with another child his age. What would you do? Well, this may be a sign of sexual abuse, that he knows sexual words at an early age. Gently cut the game short for the sake of the other child. Write down what you heard and pass it on to John or Agnes as soon as possible. Don't tell the parents. If there is abuse, they may be involved. A bit more on this just now. Dealing with disclosures. Dealing with disclosures by a young person. It's important that you know what to do if a young person makes a disclosure of abuse, whether by one of our workers or someone outside church. Listen actively and calmly. Pay careful attention. You'll need to write this down later and pass it on. You may want to take the child to a quiet corner where you can still be seen but not overheard. Do not promise to keep a secret. Do say, I can't promise not to tell anyone, but I do promise only to tell people who will help you. Don't ask questions except to clarify understanding. Leading questions might taint evidence later if it sounds like you've put words in the child's mouth. So who did that is okay, but was it your uncle who did it is not. More guidance is given in the guidelines, section 14. It's not your job to investigate. Leave that to the experts. And don't jump to conclusions, even if you think you know the child or the family well. Explain what you intend to do next, and don't delay. Write down what you were told as accurately as possible, ideally within an hour, but not while you're with the child. Use the child's own words when you can. Sign and date and keep it safe until you can give the record to the coordinator. Tell John or Agnes as soon as possible. And don't tell anyone else, but ask John or Agnes if you need support yourself. What will happen next if you pass on a disclosure or a concern? Well, as we said before, the safeguarding coordinators and one of the ministers will decide what action, if any, needs to be taken. You may need to be involved in the future too, telling outside agencies or the police what was said, or supporting the child, since they obviously decided that you were someone they could trust. We hope you will see the need for and value of these procedures and follow them, but none of this prevents you from contacting police or social work or 318 or Christian Safeguarding Services yourself. All their numbers are on the back of the guidelines. Hearing a disclosure of abuse can be very upsetting, and so do ask John or Agnes if you need support. Here's a final scenario to think about. It's 7:30 p.m. on Friday evening and you're trying to get the kids out of the building after youth group so that you can tidy up and go home. One girl is being slow and then blurts out that she needs to talk to you. She tells you that when her dad gets drunk, he beats her and her mum. What would you do? Pause the video and think about that. Well, the first thing is you must take time to listen, even though you're keen to go home. Sit somewhere visible, but not audible. And ask someone else on the team to stay in the building with you. Try to work out if she thinks she will be in immediate danger when she goes home. If it's urgent, if it's immediate, you need to take immediate action. If you can't contact John or Agnes, you should take appropriate action to ensure the immediate safety and well-being of the child, which would be probably a call to social services. 318 and Christian Safeguarding Services are Christian safeguarding advice agencies that you can phone for urgent advice at any time. But finally, safeguarding for eternity. There's a danger that safeguarding training can make us anxious and too risk averse. It can seem like the safest thing to do is to do nothing. But remember, we have a responsibility to prepare all of our children and young people for eternity by giving them the chance to hear and obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. And because of that responsibility to safeguard them for eternity, we must run activities, build relationships, and be in their lives. And our policy and guidelines provide a safe structure within which to do that as much as we possibly can. That's the end of the training session. Please remember to email agnes.bruff@tron.church to say that you've received a copy of the guidelines and have finished this training session. Well done.